goes Maverick right on cue. Just making sure we are good to go and getting us set up for what appears to be a hot topic. Every time I do training on emotional eating, it does get a lot of women showing up and being like, that's something that resonates with me. And this is actually part one of many parts. So today I'm going to give you a little bit, and then we're going to come back subsequent weeks or whatever to kind of dig in a little bit more on this topic. Hi, Sharon. Okay, so today we're talking about all things emotional eating. I've called it Emotional Eating 101 because it's where we want to start. And what I'm hoping to do with today's training is getting women connected to like their emotions, so their feelings, and what they are doing or not doing, and on how that's connected to weight loss. Because typically in the 14 years of coaching women, my experience is that they go on diets or approaches where it's eat this food at this time, do this or what have you, but they're not actually looking at emotions. And we can often, and a lot of women can follow a meal plan or a shake-based program or the supplements or whatever when, life is moving along and things feel really good. But when emotional stuff happens, that's where, we're on the bandwagon and then quickly off the bandwagon. So I'm hoping that today's training is that I'm helping you connect the dots here and saying, like, even though you might have tried everything or you've been on this weight loss quest for a while, have you looked at the emotional connection to what it is that you're doing or not doing? So that's what we're diving into today. So Sharon already said hi, but if you're here, whether you're live or on the replay, I always love knowing who the imperfect action takers. So I hope that you'll pop into the comments at some point and let me know that you're here. So my story here is like, obviously for women, emotional eating happens for a lot of different reasons, but for me, it would come as a reward. So whether I was rewarding myself for being good, like hitting my nutrition and my workouts, a kind of like an I deserve it mentality kind of thing, or sometimes it came up as a way to kind of reward, if not soothe myself when I experienced something really hard. So sometimes while I was going through it, and sometimes afterwards as a way to acknowledge like I did the hard thing. So for me, it was a reward thing. I used to use the cheat day mentality. Well, it used to be a cheat meal, then a cheat day, then it was a cheat weekend, and then that cheat didn't work. And then it would be like, oh, I did really good. Yeah, I deserve that. Specifically when I was around someone else who's eating something that I liked, or like there was kind of like that food pusher around as well. And then the other thing would be like, like I crushed that, even just like in business, for example, it's like a lot of it's really new, right? And so you do this really hard thing and you're like, yeah, I did it. I deserve that chocolate, that sort of. So that's how it comes up for me. And it still does, it not as frequently as it used to, but it still does. And the key now is, one, does it ever go away? I'm not really sure. But for me, it's that I can catch it a lot sooner so it doesn't snowball and snowball and snowball, right? And I'm having those conversations with myself where I'm a bit more reflective. So it was always something that made me feel like I was broken, like I was not good enough, or I was missing something, and on a journey looking for more motivation and willpower, because for some reason that's what we were told to look for, and that was going to solve it all, right? It also felt disconnected from other parts of myself. Like I could figure out other things I had, willpower and motivation and discipline, like in those other areas when I think about like school, or when I think about like business, or when I think about those kinds of things. But when it came to this, it was way different, and I couldn't figure out why it was different, like why I had these skills in other areas, but it wouldn't transfer over here, right? So I don't know if that's resonating with you, but that's kind of how it's showing up for me. So when it comes to emotional eating, like I said, it shows up for, all kinds of different reasons. So it could be for you, like when I'm stressed, this is what happens, or when I'm anxious, when I'm sad, when there's boredom, or feeling grief, or when I'm looking or seeking comfort, for example. It could be reward too, like in my story. It could be procrastination. It could be when you're angry, when you're tired, when you're lonely, when you're guilty, or when you're feeling really frustrated. overeated, right? So there are many emotions that you try to distract from, and you do this often with food. So that's what we're talking about emotional eating. What I do want to say about emotional eating up front is that emotional eating isn't necessarily bad. It's when we're doing it in a way that makes us feel what we don't want to feel, or it's in a way that's no longer helpful. It's in a way that's distracting or numbing, for example. So if you find yourself feeling like eating, but then that feeling isn't physical hunger, chances are you're an emotional eater. It's also important to note that emotional eating doesn't always look like a binge, but a binge is always emotional. There's, when we look at it, a binge is actually different than emotional eating. However, a binge is always triggered by some sort of emotional eating, but emotional eating can exist outside of a binge eating episode. So why it shows up. So what I have found in my 14 plus years of coaching women is most people struggle with their weight because of, a couple of reasons. One, they overeat too much food at their meals. So whether those meals are healthy or not, we understand that we need a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. So oftentimes we're overeating, on the weekends, for example, at a mealtime, or we're overeating throughout the course of the day because we're nibbling and snacking and doing those sorts of things. And that means whether it's healthy or not healthy, we overeat too much at meal times. They eat when eating has nothing to do with being physically hungry. So this is something that I coach a lot of my clients to do, is to check in with their body, check in with their fullness and that sort of thing. And so we're eating for other reasons besides we're physically hungry. A caveat is not to say that we can't eat outside of when we're just to assume that we're only going to eat when we're physically hungry for the rest of our lives. That just feels like an impossible thing for me to envision for myself or for somebody else. But it's really just noticing, am I hungry, or is there something else going on? And after coaching women for 14 years, I can tell you that that's the biggest hurdle. They often think it's tell me what to eat and tell me how to move my body, but it's often understanding why they're eating. There's physiological reasons, like your body is actually craving something. So it could be like maybe you skipped a meal, you didn't get enough protein or fiber earlier day, or your meal plan is maybe like too depriving, and or even if you're, let's say, women doing too much cardio, for example. And then there could be psychological reasons, like we discussed. You want to eat because you want to eat, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just understanding that oftentimes women aren't eating because they want to eat. They're eating because it's around, it's available, it's accessible. For example, I'm eating Honey Nut Cheerios because that's the only thing that's in my cupboard, but really that's not what I want. But they're also not tuning into they're justifying it. So they're just saying like, oh, I've been really good, or like, oh, I deserve this. Oh, it's just one, or you only live once, for example, versus just saying like, I just want it, right? Again, reward could be another issue there. I deserve this for being so good, for working hard, for being so disciplined, or because, oh, it's nighttime, right? So the kids are in bed, so the show is on, I'm sitting on the couch, cue the food, and we don't actually think these things consciously. It's just the habit loop we're kind of find ourselves in. So those are generally like the 4 reasons I see women struggle with weight, which probably is not something that a lot of women have considered. Obviously, eating too much food at their meals. Oftentimes women will look at that from previous diets, but usually it's looking at unhealthy foods versus just healthy foods. And eating when had nothing to do with physical hunger, we understand that it's coming up, but we just blame it on willpower or lack thereof, or discipline, for example. And then physiologicals, we haven't, what I do with my clients is backtrack. So if they're like feeling really snacky late at night, for example, it's like we're going back in the day to figure out where it might have started. And then we're saying, okay, tomorrow you're going to try this and see what happens. So we're always troubleshooting in real time that way. And then psychological reasons, like I said, is like one, it's like the cues, the habit, the environment, that sort of thing. And then we have some conversations in our head that justify kind of our eating too. So a lot of my clients have heard me say that every behavior is an attempt to solve a problem, just doesn't always solve the right problem, and sometimes creates other problems. So if you take eating because you're angry, you eat to feel better, you feel comforted perhaps, it has nothing to do with willpower, motivation, or discipline. You want to solve your anger by feeling something different, right? But the food doesn't solve your angry. In fact, for most women, it creates other feelings, let's say like guilt, shame, or like fuck it or blew it attitude. You see what I mean? It's kind of like that saying, rob Peter to pay Paul, and it creates this loop you can't get out of that again has nothing to do with willpower, motivation, or discipline. Okay, so some people say, okay, but if I deal with my feelings, I will stop kind of this overeating, this emotional eating, or maybe for some people it's the binge eating. Um, okay, this is my answer. Yes, no, it depends. Like we've already talked about, emotional eating is usually triggered by some underlying emotional trigger. So working towards addressing these triggers may certainly lessen emotional eating, but it's unrealistic to think that you'll only ever eat when you're physically hungry, or for fuel and nothing else, no other times. Food is biologically designed for pleasure, and as such, it will probably be eaten for enjoyment or for self-soothing sometimes, no matter how well you're managing your underlying emotions. Additionally, research shows that our likelihood of turning to food for comfort over, let's say, other coping mechanisms is directly correlated with restrictive thinking and behavior. In other words, this is not just about the emotional trigger, but again, it's about mindset here too, right? And so basically, it's to say, like, hey, if you deal with your feelings, will it automatically go away? No, it's exactly what I said in my example is like, I can catch the trigger a lot faster and I can stop it from snowballing even more. And so that to me is helpful. But to say that I don't experience emotional eating whatsoever would be untrue. And to say that women will only eat when they're physically hungry, it could be possible for a short amount of time, but I don't over the long run, because food was designed for pleasure. It's going to be eaten for enjoyment. It's going to be eaten for self-soothing sometimes, no matter how much you're managing your underlying emotions. But we can see that there's a correlation between our emotions and what we do or don't do. And we can see that there's a correlation between restrictive thinking and behavior and the increase in emotions as well. And then as a result, what we do or don't do. So here's why it's not about having more willpower, motivation, or discipline. Eating can be a language that the body uses to express its distress about something that's going unaddressed. In other words, it's eating for an emotional feeling versus a physiological hunger. So it can be a language to say, like, I'm feeling stressed and I don't have the words to articulate the way I'm feeling, or I'm not ready to articulate it, or I'm so heightened in the stress response right now that eating just becomes the way I'm manifesting the feelings of stress, right? It could be something that has evolved over time, something that's always been there, for example, or something new because it's the easiest thing to give you the outlet until you get to being able to deal with the stress or express the stress, or the stress subsides. It's no longer kind of like that intense, right? So if your eating behavior is highly emotionally charged, if you eat too much or too little, repeatedly eat trigger foods, or obsess about eating, your body is speaking, it's giving you clues. And what I really love about that is because we often think, oh, I just need more willpower, I just need more motivation, I just need more discipline. But what if you were actually looking at, I'm sending me a clue. What's the clue I need to pick up on here, right? If you're eating too much or you're eating too little, repeatedly eating trigger foods or obsessing about eating, how is my body speaking to me right now? So eating can be calming because it narrows your focus or your attention. When it's just us and the food, it can feel like the rest of the world disappears, or it feels like for that brief moment, I just feel a little less stressed, a little overwhelmed, a little less frustrated, for example. So food is so much more than fuel. We eat for other reasons other than keeping ourselves alive. And some of those reasons are healthy and positive, and some of them are just less so, right? So unlike certain people, food is undemanding, right? Some people definitely can be. It's always kind of feels like it's there for us, and it lives to kind of give. So overeating is often a welcome release in a life that maybe feels like is full of like commitments or obligations or responsibilities and demands from others. So let's look at maybe 8 reasons why you might be doing it that might be different than the physiological hunger. So the first one, and you can take a tally if you like and see how many of these would appear to be true for you. And if I say one and you're like, you just write a question mark behind it. And then as you go through the week, you can kind of look like and see, does that one come up for me? So number one is some of us try to protect ourselves by eating or not eating. So whether it's resolving something, soothing, we're avoiding maybe like hard emotions, for example, it can distract us from conflict or confrontation too. I've had clients who go, feel like socially awkward, for example, or just don't like social events, or like feeling like, so they, eat, for example, so they don't have to have the conversations, and you kind of not feel those feelings. So it could be a way of protecting you, whether you're eating or not eating. So that would be number one. Number two is we naturally and subconsciously seek approval from others we're surrounded by, especially the people we love. So those patterns are often true of eating styles. So sometimes it's just hard to set boundaries with people without the fear of them not accepting us, liking us, or confronting us. So I think about, the holiday, and I think about my mom, and my mom, feels love when we eat all of her food and we eat in abundance. She's always looking to see how much somebody ate, right? And so if I was in a position where I needed my mother's approval, for example, then I would just give into that for her, the patterns of her love, the patterns of how she expresses that and sort of thing. And I have a harder time setting a boundary because I don't know how to make her feel loved any other way, or I feel like that's the only way she feels love. So we naturally and subconsciously seek approval from others. So that could be number two. Number three, it's easy to get caught up in comparison with someone else, like the friend or the spouse that eats everything and doesn't gain a pound. We can adopt their eating patterns because of the comparison or fear of missing out, or just that if they can, why can't I? And I get that amongst working with women, for example, their husband. It's like, they can eat whatever, or they can even just say like, I'm going to lose weight, and then cut out, let's say, one thing, for example, or nighttime snacking. And then all of a sudden they drop weight so much faster than we do. But also it's like, my kids are enjoying this, for example. And so we just aren't eating because we want it. We aren't eating it because, because we want it and we like it, or we're hungry. We're eating it because, well, if they can, why can't I? Or if it works for them, why can't it work for me? Or if it looks easy for them, why can't it look easy for me? So for some, food is love. Like I gave you the example of my mom. It's how you provide. It's how you're a great mother or partner. Others around us are ready to make the change. So it can lead to resentment or the feeling of no support, or that is way too much work. And I get that one too, for if you're the kind of family that values around like family dinners, for example, or like you're the one that's always cooking the meals from scratch and putting it out, and food is your love language, for example, and your family kind of, enjoying that and having that time is love, then cooking something separate is just like going to take away from that feeling. It's not just about my goals here. It's now I'm missing out on this other component here. And so, for some, it's food is equated with love. Not only are other people, like my example of my mom, but that's how I get love as well, or I get value, for example, or how I define myself as a good mother, for example. Number five, we have those that are always pushing food on us. Just one bite, you only live once. Another diet, right? They make us feel that we need to eat more or different than we would like. So in those moments, it can feel like a struggle to kind of differentiate other people's goals from our own and stay focused on what's more important to you, right? And I always find this one interesting because I have no problem saying no to pumpkin pie, because I hate pumpkin pie, or lemon tarts, for example, or cheesecake. I hate cheesecake, right? And so I can, it's so easy to stay affirmed in what I don't like, right? With people who are like, oh, you can have just one, or hey, I made this cheesecake, and you can be like, no, I really hate cheesecake, for example. But when it comes to something that you feel is attached to someone's value or the way they perceive you, or you're indifferent with it, like you like that, but you're trying to do this healthy eating thing, for example, it's like all of a sudden it's like we don't have the same resolve. And it can happen with alcohol too. It's like, no, I don't drink. And then you have some people who are like, cool, I can respect that. Other people are obviously, why not? You just live once, for example. Anyway, the sense here is that it's always being pushed on you, but you can see instances where people are pushing other things, whether that be more work or whether that be your kids joining extracurricular activities, and we can say no. So why is this one different? Why is pumpkin pie black and white for me, but why are oatmeal raisin cookies that are super soft and chewy not a black and white thing for me, right? And so it's looking at, I'm eating again for other reasons that are not hunger. I'm eating because I don't know how to create a boundary around this, or it feels uncomfortable. Or two, it's like I'm easily swayed into someone else's goals because I really don't have clarity on where I'm going. We use it to bond, for example, like with friends over drinks and appetizers too. And again, we just celebrated the Easter weekend, so maybe that's how you bond, and that's how you get connected to traditions too. Always 5 o'clock somewhere. For example, always celebrating. It's easy to get caught in a moment making emotional food choices, even exciting ones. It's easy to lose ground and lose touch with longer term goals. So those celebratory moments always offer a choice. How much of a long term goal are you willing to delay for a celebration? And you really get to choose the best answer for you. And whatever you decide, if it's intentional, it'll leave you feeling more confident and settled. The key is that it's intentional. And when it's intentional, then we're not overeating it, right? We are truly having a reason to celebrate. We are using food as an expression of our celebration, along with the company of others or the accomplishment that was achieved. Food isn't the center thing, it's just part of the celebration activities. But generally, because it's intentional, you feel really settled and grounded in it. It's not something that, oh, I blew it, I got to start again on Monday, here I go again, that sort of thing. And then we can use food to cope through hard feelings. So, for example, grief and loss. This can be a loss of a person or even a pet, but also of an idea or an identity, for example, or a way of life. For example, you've lost your job or had some of your life's illusions kind of shattered. It can also include trauma too. And I had a client too who was like key milestones after her mother passed away. She would find herself in this emotional eating. She would beat herself up until we uncovered, well, that's how she was keeping the memory of her mom alive. And so if that was the way she was keeping the memory of her mom alive, how could we do it in a more intentional way? Meaning, well, she didn't need to feel guilty and shame and resentful and all that stuff, and she didn't need to overeat, but she could bake and she could enjoy it, right? So grief and loss, life changes, for example, you just had a baby, taken on a new job, you've moved or recently become divorced, your identity and life circumstances have shifted. And so sometimes it's that we find ourselves in unwanted eating patterns or overeating patterns just because we're dealing with the shift, right? And it's like, it's just a season that we're in. And even though we want it to go away, we want to cope with it other ways. Sometimes when we're in, let's say like you've just taken on a new baby or a new job, for example, recently, those are high stress moments. That's not where the new skills are going to come in those high stress moments. You're going to have to navigate that season and just know you're not going to get stuck in there. So life changes could be one as well. Relationship problems, whether that's relationships with parents, family members, friends, or coworkers, or because we don't have the skills or expertise to deal with the stuff that life is handing us. So you find it tough to express your feelings and thoughts. I find this a lot with coaching clients who are people pleasers. You might feel like you're often misunderstood or alone, and you struggle to connect meaningfully with other people, or you're just in a new kind of unfamiliar situation. So those are 8 reasons. I'm curious to know how many of those 8 reasons were coming up for you as well, or which ones maybe you're like, I need to spend this week kind of exploring that a little bit more because I had never considered that. And if you feel open to doing so, you can share that in the comments. So here's what we need to know about emotional eating. The term emotional eating can be used for good and evil, right? On one hand, realizing that we use food, both restricting it and consuming it for emotional reasons rather than physical reasons, is an important step towards, making kind of those healthier choices with food after we stop, let's say, dieting, for example. So when we understand that we're being driven to eat by emotional triggers, we can have an opportunity to do something about it, like deal with our real feelings and address what's actually going on, which feels like you're opening up like a can of worms, right? It's like life is moving at lightning speed for me, and there's a lot of other things happening. So if I open up that can of worms, Cindy, it's like, I don't know what to do with all those worms. I don't have the skills. I don't have the tools. I think I'm going to fall apart or break down. And so that bag feels so heavy and so big, for example. And so then we start to try to control or manage our eating, our coping strategies to deal with the bag because we're too afraid to open the bag. So when we can like if you're starting to understand that we eat, some of your eating patterns or unwanted eating patterns are triggered by emotional triggers, you do now own it. You're responsible for making the choice, whether you do or you don't do something with it. On the other hand, when we turn emotional eating into a sin, like another behavior to be avoided at all costs, we fall into the same diet mentality that always leads, to overeating, binge eating, unwanted eating, or other dysfunctional behaviors with food. So the goal here is not to eat eat or not to eat. The goal is to connect more deeply to what we truly need and, try and make more empowered choices accordingly. So lastly, some women will say, I just love food, right? And so we're not even looking at the emotional eating. We're just saying, I love food. So the thing with this one though, I'll just go off a little bit on a tangent, is generally when we love something, we don't smother it. And generally when we love something, we give it space. We don't kind of overconsume it. So if I love my husband, I don't generally smother him 24/7, and I don't generally like overdo it, right? It's like I'm showing love in very different ways, in healing ways, in grounding ways, in ways that make me feel connected. But something about food, when I love food, it means that I get to eat fast, I get to overeat, I get to eat all things, and I just get to forget about who I want to be, where I'm going, and that sort of thing. And it's just interesting when you look at when you love your child, when you love your career, your job, or your spouse, or your dog, for example, how we act in love in accordance to that versus when we say I love food, and how there's a difference there between those two things. Am I on the right track? Give me a thumbs up if so. So people wonder if the fact that I encourage eating only when you're physically hungry and stopping when your body is physically satisfied means that there is no room for just loving food. Now, I'm encouraging that we get more in tune with our physical eating, right? Is because a lot of us don't know when we're hungry until we're hangry, and we don't know when we're satisfied until we're stuffed, right? But the other thing is that we also need to acknowledge that, hey, food is tasty and we eat for other reasons. Emotional reasons are there, right? As well. But it does mean that you can still love food, right? So let's talk about what it really means to love food. We spend hours thinking about certain foods, craving them, imagining them, anticipating them, planning them, looking forward to having them. Does this mean we love them? When you really love something, you really make time for it. You're present for it. You're kind of like just mindful, like meaningful attention to it. You notice it and appreciate it. If I love my husband and I go on a trip, for example, but on the trip I'm scrolling my phone, I'm constantly moving to one activity to the other, like whatever. It's like that's not really how I'm showing love. I'm showing love if, we're playful together, if we're intentional together, if we're spending quality time having great conversations. But when it comes to food, we're not necessarily doing the same thing. It's like love means something different over here, but over here it means something different. So for example, if you got the chance to travel for a week to somewhere you loved, would you spend that week staying in the hotel room looking out your window? If your friend that lives far away came over, would you spend all that time on your phone? And if you were having a deep conversation with someone you love, would you watch TV? Probably not, right? So why, when we claim to love food, do we spend almost every eating experience doing a million other things while eating? And why do we crave and anticipate the food all day long, then we get it, plop ourselves down in front of the TV or a laptop or tablet, and proceed to completely ignore the experience of eating? It's because too often it's not the food we love, it's the escape, it's the comfort, it's the release it provides. You're getting something else from it. You're looking to food to soothe or to calm or to love ourselves. We're looking to food to assure us that everything is going to be okay, that we're good enough, or that we're not alone, or that we're appreciated or valued. Those are things that food simply cannot do, though. So we continue to fill those holes and continue to try and fill them with food, and kind of like that cycle keeps going, keeps going. So I think it's wonderful to love food, but really loving food means being present kind of for the full experience. So we're going to go deeper in this training coming up. So for now, the goal was to get you aware of the emotional eating and how it might be showing up for you. So I'm going to leave you with one simple tool. It's called the 5 whys. You might have heard of this before. You ask why 5 times, and you allow the answer to appear and build on one another to offer, more insight and more actionable steps. So I'm going to give you an example of how you can use the 5 whys. I'd encourage you this week, you could do it once, you could do it every day, you could do it every time you feel like or reflect on, hey, I engaged in emotional eating, you can dig into the 5 whys. So for example, you're eating a pint of ice cream in front of a television at 10 p.m. Why am I eating this? Because I'm trying to relax. Why do I need to relax? Because I had a hard day and food helps me zone out. Why do I need to zone out? Because thinking about my stress makes me anxious. And why am I anxious? Because I don't feel like I'm getting my needs met at work, at home, in my relationship, etc. And why am I not getting my needs met? Because I don't do what I need to do for me. And I'm constantly putting other people's needs ahead of mine. And I don't seem to carve out time for myself. Boom! Action steps acquired, right? And I do this one a lot with coaching clients right at the beginning when they're like, I want to join coaching. I need to do the 5 whys to figure out what exactly you're looking for and why you need coaching. And so what I find is sometimes we have a really hard time going deep. We want to be really surface level, but that is not helping you. But you could see doing these 5 whys with the client, how much deeper she got every time. And now you could see, well, God, this isn't about willpower or discipline or motivation at all. It's really about my needs are not being met. And now we can look at the elephant in the room. So maybe, if she did carve out time for herself to do the things she needed to do for herself, she wouldn't be so stressed and anxious when she got home and feel the need to eat her feelings. So this is really just an example of how powerful the 5 whys can be to help you uncover the real reasons behind your emotional eating. So people say all the time, I eat my feelings. So maybe finding a way to instead express those feelings, either through words, actions, boundaries, scheduling changes, speaking your truth, etc. You can maybe, alleviate some of the emotions that you're trying to bury with food. So emotional eating is a really, it's a multifaceted issue, but I wanted to give you at least one tool to get you started. But this is a good conversation for us to continue to have. So this wraps up today's trainings. We looked at how emotional eating shows up, why emotional eating shows up, how your feelings are connected to your binges or overeating, for example, the 8 reasons we eat besides hunger. We looked at, is emotional eating all bad? And we looked at what if you love food? What does that mean? And how do we go about that? And the 5 whys approach. So before we go to today's training, I always leave you with this, is to consider that the trainings are like a glass of water. It holds value when it's consumed, not when it's left untouched. So that means you got to do something with today's training. It's your responsibility to take action. Being an information taker, for example, or an information seeker is one thing, but it does not mean that anything is going to change in your life. You actually need to do something with it. You actually need to consume the water in order to feel the benefits of the water. But it's not just consuming it once. We got to drink it, consistently, and so that we can get the benefits of the water. And for this, it's consistently taking imperfect action. So the key is really just to take that imperfect action. So if you find yourself needing support along the way, feel free to reach out into the DMs and explore the option of personalized coaching, or you can drop into the comments actually, because there is a free coaching series all about weight loss and about simplifying things, and it's 7 days, and I'd love to see you in that. All right, I'm Coach Sydney signing off.